I love movies. This is no secret to anyone, okay? I don't want to say I'm a film buff because I feel like the definition of somebody who's a film buff is somebody that like knows movies. I just love movies. Does that make sense? Like the distinction? I love watching movies, and one of my favorite movies and favorite characters to come out of a movie of recent years is Zendaya's character Tashi Duncan from the movie Challengers. Now, if you have not watched Challengers or been subjected to the memes of Challengers, okay, this movie is following three characters, okay? Tashi Duncan, who at the beginning of the movie is this amazing tennis prodigy, and due to a career ending injury, okay, she loses that side of her and vicariously lives through her husband, Art Donaldson, okay, even while she takes part in like it's like a weird like love triangle affair that takes space over many years, and tennis serves as like this euphemism for the complexities in their romantic relationship, okay? It spans a lot of different things and a lot of different meanings, okay? And I'll say it, I've said it once and I'll say it again. I love women's rights and I love when women do wrong. Okay. I love a morally grey character, a character that makes decisions that makes me sit there and go, what are we doing? Especially when it's a woman. And I loved Tashi Duncan's character. There's like this one TikTok edit where she's like sitting down, and Be My Baby by Ariana Grande is playing in the background. And then one of the characters, Patrick, is arguing with her saying, I'm not a member of one of your fan clubs. And then she like stands up and stares him down in the eyes, like proper eye contact, and is like, you're not a member of my fan club. I want to be her when I'm older. I really do, okay? But one of the most enthralling parts of her characters to me that is often not really discussed, okay, is that, like I mentioned before, Tashi is a childhood prodigy, a legend, okay, in as a teenager in the world of tennis. She's slated to become one of the greats, and this is something and a label that is put onto her before we even see Tashi on screen, okay? She is amazing and she loves the sport and she's passionate about it. And you can see the way in which she talks and communicates these things as well. However, due to a career ending injury, this is not a spoiler, it's literally in the trailer of the movie, okay? She then loses this connection from this idea of being this famed, amazing future tennis player. Like that future evaporates in front of her eyes. And we see her struggle to come to grips in terms with this throughout the movie, and also how that has allowed her to live in this very weird, vicarious relationship with her husband, Art, who was a tennis player, and she kind of seeking this high that she can never achieve or get back, okay, which creates complicated relationship dynamics with her daughter, with her husband, and with herself when it comes to tennis, okay? Tashi had defined herself for a lot of the movie and in her childhood and her teenage years by being good at this one thing. Okay, and this has led me to consider, amongst other things in life and other conversations that I've had with many different people, while it's not 100% directly related to this idea, but it's this notion of, if you have defined your identity being one thing as a child, like the society or whatever it is has defined, your purpose, your meaning to be this one thing. And if that meaning or purpose disappears for whatever reason, okay, what happens to an individual? Okay, what psychologically happens to an individual? And it led me to consider this idea of burnout, okay, which is something that is used and is a phrase that is quite pervasive, is a little bit of a buzzword to the point like those annoying boomers. I have this habit, okay, where I listen to those like political podcasts where like normal everyday people like call in and weigh in on their opinions, and there's always some like boomer going like, oh, but the young people are so lazy, and burnout, what is burnout? I never got burnout in my day. But burnout is a real thing. And what I've actually noticed, especially after graduating from doing my undergrad in the University of Cambridge, I say last year, we're in 2026, this is almost 2 years ago. Okay, University of Cambridge is one of the best universities in the world. You have some of the most talented, well-spoken, well-read, like most well-rounded people. But what I started to notice that as they graduated, or even as they were going through this academic institution, they started to lose themselves. Okay, burnout became more of a singular event as a result of studying really hard for an exam, but became a facet and this construct of their identity that they carried out into post-grad life. Okay, and it made me think about Tashi Duncan. It made me think about myself. It made me think about a friend. And I had been thinking about it so much that I was like, I need to come back to the podcast. I'll be 100% honest with you guys. There was a phase in January where it's like, I don't think I'm going to come back. Like, I don't think I'm going to sit down and I don't have anything that I need to say. I don't have anything I want to say. I don't have anything that I want to do or talk about. I didn't find value in the way I was communicating things or of my thoughts. I was definitely going through a period of burnout as it pertains to this podcast, but also like a lot of different things in my life. And so this leads me to begin to question and prompt. And, I got my notebook out, I was doodling, and then this episode was born amongst many others this season. So welcome, geniuses, to this episode of Female Genius Podcast, where we're going to discuss post-grad burnout and what happens when you're no longer considered special by life anymore. Female Genius. In the case of making any argument, we always have to start off by defining what the hell we mean by burnout. In a clinical setting, a lot of them determine burnout as this notion or this idea of somebody, experiencing psychological stress as a result of having ineffective coping mechanisms for work-related or life-related stresses, okay? And now, this paper, published by Jesus Montero Mari and Javier Prado Abril and co. in 2014, okay, describes and splits burnout into 3 different categories, okay? And so they subdivide burnout in this manner, okay? In frantic burnout, which you can say is being overwhelmed, and this is the type of burnout that is driven by ambition, okay? So these are usually individuals who work increasingly hard and are super ambitious and driven by whatever societal metric or self-imposed metric they have set for themselves. And they work increasingly harder to overcome obstacles until they are physically and mentally exhausted, okay? So that is frantic burnout. There's another type of burnout, which is under-challenged burnout, which is almost a little bit the opposite. So this results from monotonous, unstimulating work. The individuals feel a lack of personal development and become cynical or indifferent because their job lacks meaning, okay? Human beings by nature were driven to find meaning in things. And this is something I'm going to discuss in a second, but somebody who feels like their job or their purpose or the thing they're doing day in and day out doesn't have any actual inherent meaning can lead to a form of burnout. And it might feel very different from the frantic burnout, but the end result is the same. This inability, this lack of want or desire or physical capability to be able to do something or push yourself to do something in a sense, okay? And then finally, you have worn out burnout. So this occurs when a person feels they have no control over their environment or results. So they eventually give up, and this becomes a passive coping mechanism. This idea, I'm not going to try anymore, I'm not going to bother, because whatever I do has no impact in the things that I want it to have impact in, okay? I like the idea of classing burnout as this idea of losing your spark. And I'm sure as I was listing out the different definitions of burnout or the different subtypes of burnout, some of the things hit. You were probably like, it felt more salient. So maybe you are beginning to relate. But now we've kind of created a definition. We need to dive deeper into the scene and what this means for young people and some of the theories of how burnout is manifesting. So why are we getting more and more young people experiencing burnout? Why are we having this mental health crisis? Why do I feel like everything is slowly fading away? Okay. And how that manifests as we enter into the big, wide, scary world. Now, let's start by, okay, I have different thought maps. The thought maps are linked, but I'm going to start off by describing the different thought maps. So first of all, we're going to start off with this obvious one, the change from big fish, small pond to small as hell fish in a huge flipping ocean, okay? So when you're younger, picture this, okay? The environment you are in, limited to, is quite small. And I remember, this is going to make me sound so old, but when I was a kid, like in primary school, like phones and YouTube and stuff were a thing, but social media like Instagram and Facebook, I just didn't have access to them. So I saw what people were doing outside of my little community and bubble, but the impact that said had on me was quite small, I would say. It might be quite different for a lot of, let's say, Gen Alpha or a lot of young people growing up now, because they probably do have phones and they're exposed to TikTok, and their community in terms of the ecological impact the things that surround them have on them is probably much larger than the one I experienced or somebody older than me might have experienced, okay? But let's say, for example, you're younger, you're in this small class, okay? And, you're amazing for different reasons. But we're going to try and paint a picture here. So you're in a class of 30 people and you happen to play piano very, very well. Okay. In this class of 30 people, you rise to the top and you are known as this amazing pianist, and you receive copious amounts of praise from the people around you for being amazing at playing the piano. So you therefore notice, or you make the psychological association, that if you perform well in this area, you receive admiration and praise. And this must be the thing you should keep going. This must be the thing that you're made for, that you're designed for. You are just put on this earth to play piano, because why would all of these other people validate me in this way? And that's not to say the validation is wrong. I just do want to caveat, we need to be a little bit neutral when we're thinking about this, okay? So now, naturally, okay, being taken to put down this pathway that you are so special and meaningful, you're encouraged to seek challenges, okay, rightfully so. And you are encouraged to say, this small pond can't fit you anymore. There are people in this pond that can't breathe. You now need to go to a bigger pond, number one, to show everybody else in that other pond over there how amazing you are. But in addition to showing everybody in that pond how amazing you are, you can also grow and become an even bigger fish, okay? Because you are limited to your size. I think it's a real thing that, like, if you put a fish, don't quote me on this, don't, like, this is not, don't quote me, but if you put like an animal or a fish in a small tank, they limit, like, like, the limit is how much they grow. Whereas if you put a fish in like an ocean, they grow a lot bigger than the fishes you might find in a tank. So I think the analogy comes from this idea of, there's multiple different facets, but if you move a big fish into a larger ocean, they also have the capacity to grow and improve and become a better version of yourself, okay? But when you get to this bigger pond, you begin to realize there are 300 other fish who are bigger than you, that are faster than you. And this idea of being the best at said thing is now lost because you're in an environment that you are not said thing, that you have defined yourself and other people have defined you by for so long. And, like, again, now, it's not an inherently bad thing to want to challenge yourself, to push yourself, to be known to be good at something, to be praised for being good at something, okay? But the problem is, when you do this for kids, they tend to build their whole identity around being said insert thing, okay? Now, this is something that causes a massive identity crisis, ego break, whatever you want to call it. When you now go to an environment where you are not that thing anymore, where else do you place your self-worth or your self-value? Because you have externalized it so much and have identified it so much by this thing that you were known for as a child, okay? Now, this is a very, very common case, particularly for students who are high achieving individuals, okay? In their secondary school, in their sixth form, they are known as the big kahunas, like, test what, 100%, like, you know what I mean? And then they either enter, you know, bigger, very well elite academic institutions, and then they're like, wow, there are people that are doing this exam drunk and scoring 100%, and I am doing this exam completely sober, doing 4 nights of copious amounts of studies, and I'm cracking 42. You know what I mean? Like, you start to realize, oh, there's levels to this shit. Like, I'm not as talented or as amazing as I supposed to be. And so there's an identity shift there. Or it could be a case of, actually, you did amazingly in this amazing, rich academic institution, and now you enter the world of work. However, the world of work is not a measurement of exams and tests and academic intelligence. You know, there's emotional intelligence now brought into the game. Is how much people like you. It's a networking game. It's a relationship kind of world. And you have not been trained or adapted or centered your identity around that piece. And so therefore, you are now slowly climbing down the ranks, and again, you're grappling with this change, and it's something that is quite common, and that could eventually lead to burnout. I think a character that's such a good example of this is Lisa Simpson. I love Lisa Simpson. I always joke she's my spirit animal, but it's not a joke. I feel so like kin-spirited to this fictional animated character. But there's so many different episodes across the season of The Simpsons where Lisa Simpson, again, when we think Lisa Simpson, she's the smart one, she's the musical one, she has her heads down, thumbs up, super duper talented and amazing, right? And she's like the voice of reason. She, you know, Lisa Simpson, okay? And there are so many episodes. For example, I remember one very clearly, and I can't remember what season or episode it was, but I remember the plot of the episode where, again, Lisa is the smartest in her school. She is the one always getting extra credit, and all of the people around her are essentially dumb. And this new girl moves into the school, and that new girl starts outperforming Lisa on tests, is more musically talented, is more morally gifted. I don't know. Everything that Lisa had defined herself and her role in the community that she grew up in had now been taken away from her and disappeared and offsetted onto this girl. And Lisa freaked out, okay? And she started sabotaging that girl and being really mean and basically changing who she was as a person because she could not cope with this idea of her identity being taken away. And that, in a microcosmic way, is a little bit of how people or high achieving individuals might lead to burnout. There came a point in this episode where Lisa was like, I don't even know who I am anymore. Like, what is my point? What is my purpose? And you can largely attribute this to she centered her whole identity and self-worth at being able to do these things, okay? Now, we also have to think of, you know, the whole idea that the education system teaches us very, very early on, from a very early age, to externalize our validation systems from outside of ourselves. So we begin to learn quite early on that success and praise and achievement is dictated by, you know, saying the right things that an examiner wants. This invisible examiner that we will never see, right, is how we achieve it and measure. And the people that do well in these circumstances are the ones that are praised and uplifted in society. and for whatever reason, whether it's because you are neurodivergent, whether you have a troubled home life, or whatever reason, you're measuring a fish on its ability to climb a tree. All of those different phrases come into play here, but there's now a disconnect between the validation in which you seek. Okay, so when we exit the academic systems and we exit into a world that is a little bit more nuanced in the way in which we ascribe value to an individual and to a person, more than just getting ticks on a test, it then can become quite crippling, being like, okay, but I don't know how I know I'm doing well. I don't know how to measure if this is right for me, if I'm achieving the things I'm supposed to achieve, if I'm doing everything on the right strict societal guidelines. Okay, it can be a lot. Okay, and there are many systems within society that might come into play in the way we define, okay, success. So we've spoken a little bit about, okay, this whole idea of, when you shift environments from an environment where you're praised to an environment where you're not, or the world becomes bigger naturally as you get older, or through social media, or the widening of our environmental landscape. Okay, the things in which you had prided yourself in being has now changed. We've spoken a little bit about how the education system teaches us to externalize our validation system in these metrics and tests, and those disappear as we enter adulthood as well. And so when we enter adulthood, it's like, oh my God, where are the tests? Where are the papers? Bring them back. How do I know if I'm doing everything correctly? Okay, but now I kind of want to talk about the systems within our society, because how do we then begin to determine or understand what is valuable for us?
Female genius.
At work, okay, I have one of my colleagues. He's so wise. Like, anytime you're on like a part of the shift with this colleague, um you just like I just walk away like 10 times wiser and with 50 more things to think about. And there was something he said while we were eating lunch, and he was like, the world is changing so fast and I'm still trying to figure out my place in it. Okay. So let's say, okay, naturally, like most people, I define myself by different society measures of success. And it's not counterintuitive, because on a human level, we are driven to want to fit in with society. Okay. We tend to, as creatures, look towards what is considered high value or the high value members of society. I really hate that word high value because of the podcast bros. Okay. And then those high value individuals become the metrics in which we judge ourselves by, and thus create the metrics of success in society. So, for example, if if you determine, okay, that the person who is succeeding in society, they're able to, on very crude terms, even though I think humans are a lot more complex than, applying it to just like basic, crude, psychological driven factors. I'm going to use it for the sake of this argument, but I will come back to having more nuance. But let's say if you're like, okay, a high value individual that I look for up to, she's really, really pretty. She has a really hot boyfriend, her boyfriend pays for everything for her. And, yeah, and she's like fit. And so then your metric of success that you measure yourself against, because you perceive this individual to be a high value, or people around you perceive this individual to be high value, is against that person. So when you're looking at, let's say, your body, you're measuring your body against said high value person, and you're like, okay, if I want to achieve all of the things and have my life look a little bit like their life, I need to mimic parts of what they're doing. And so what are the values and what they do? And that's not a bad or abnormal thing to do. But this is because there's an evolutionary bias. Like, we look towards members of society that are exceeding very well, and this is something that has pervaded the role of time. But there is this amazing paper, okay? And as always, I always link my sources, any papers I reference, down below, because I want to encourage as many people as possible. Read the papers, develop your own opinions yourself. I cannot be your sole driver and opinion for some of these things. You really do need to go and read them. And I intentionally select papers that I think are very accessible for people who aren't within that specific field to go and read and to ascertain. I feel like I should do an episode on how to read papers. That will be a fun little mini footnotes episode. Anyway, so there is this really cool paper that is called The Evolutionary Mismatch Hypothesis: Implications for Psychological Science. And it's a brilliant paper. And I want to assume, from the way I read the paper and the size and the way it was written, that it was somebody's thesis from the University of Singapore. Okay. But it makes an argument that our psychology and behavior works in a way where there is an environmental input, and then this in turn produces a behavioral output that hopefully increases things like survival and reproduction. Okay. And a lot of these behavioral outputs that we have created and have become embedded part of psyche and our behavioral interactions with our world were created within the hunter-gatherer era. So they were creative and embedded, and that was really, really long time ago. However, society and our environment have evolved, but the mechanisms and our behavioral outputs have not evolved. So we're having mismatched inputs that lead to behaviors that aren't actually good for us, but it's not the fault of our psychology because our psychology hasn't really changed in so long. So that's a little bit complicated, but I'm going to use an example that they use in the paper, okay? So let's say in the hunter-gatherer times, before technology and all of these different things, okay? They have an input, which is they require food sources from nature. And they require food sources of nature because they want to obtain energy to be able to carry out bodily functions and live. Okay. And so they develop a mechanism and a psychological drive to want the sweetest tasted things and the most calorie dense food. Food was less accessible. You had to go out and find it and hunt for it. So you want the things that have the biggest payoff for the amount of energy you're exerting. Okay. This leads to an adaptive output that at the time led them to eating fruits and berries and very calorie dense food to allow them to have enough energy to sustain their bodily functions. However, nowadays, the desire to obtain foods that are sweet and calorie dense has remained the same. However, the input, the environment has changed because food is so much more accessible now for most people. And food has become manufactured. You have refined sugars. It's just so much easier for us to get calorie dense and sweet food. However, behavior has not changed. We still have that psychological drive to seek out calorie dense and sweet food. And then as a result, it leads to a maladaptive output where we're eating crisps and fizzy drinks and things that aren't necessarily good for us, leading us to put on more weight and having other impacts on our body. But the behavioral mechanism was useful at one point, but society has changed. And so this whole paper is discussing how this mismatch in evolutionary behavior is causing many different problems across different facets of society. It's really interesting. They speak a little bit about postpartum depression, they speak about economics, and they speak about how this can inform policies that political decision makers make. So it was a very, very interesting paper. So when we think about it in the terms of the need to want to fit into society, to acquire a partner, whatever you want is important to you, okay? Even things that might not be good for our mental health. If we have this behavioral output, something that's embedded within our psyche to want to fit in, to want to be a high value individual, to want to be wanted, to want to be needed, to want to be fit in. It actually makes sense why we so quickly as young people absorb society's definition of success, but we are met with this maladaptive output of potential burnout because actually the environment doesn't match the behavior, and so therefore we're getting a maladaptive output where we're overworked, we're overstressed, we're not finding meaning anywhere. But where does the change come? Where does it lie in this? And I think that's a very interesting take and way to extract, okay, how do we perceive these different things? And like I said before, I'm not saying all of these things are inherently bad. I'm not saying it's bad for you to want to be and make a lot of money. I'm not saying it's really bad for you to want like a partner and to settle down before somebody comes at me and says I'm an angry feminist or something like that. But what I am saying is that if a lot of young people are chasing these metrics in society and they're feeling burnt out, they're feeling worth it. It's even funny because I have some friends who are working the jobs that, our high value individuals are supposedly wanting to work. They have the very rich, high paying finance jobs, the law jobs, the things that, they've been chasing all their lives because they've been told they're smart and, this is how you make the most money and this is how you be incredible. And they're there and they're like, no, I'm burnt out. I hate it. And there could be this argument of like delayed gratification. Maybe it's something that will pay off in dividends later on in their life. Maybe they can retire early. Maybe they, are led down this path. Maybe they're exposed to other people. But again, there is this post-grad burnout. Like, I'm not making this shit up. You have to believe me. So yeah, but like I said, I often think that, science can be our explanation for a lot of things. They can help us root out the causes. They can help us, diagnose, the root cause and, look at the symptoms from a different perspective. But I think when we're coming in terms of behavior and how people act and how we move and we believe, we have to look to the humanities. So as we move on to the section of the podcast where I'm talking about resolutions, we are going to look towards philosophy and we're going to look towards art. And hopefully, maybe potentially we can find a solution to this post-grad burnout that we all seem to be suffering with.
Female genius.
Let's look towards the philosophers. There is an obvious subset of philosophy ideals, Stoicism, that we could potentially look for to an answer. This notion of we should only be inherently focused on, I'm simplifying Stoicism quite a bit. But this idea like we should just focus on things within our control. Burnout, we're trying to achieve things that are beyond us. We should focus on our thing that we control, which is us as human beings and what we do and not what other people do, not like, the stocks and the economy or the state of world politics, because those are things that whatever position you occupy in your life are largely out of your control. So we should just not bother. Could be the slowest take that we can take, but I feel like boring. Okay, and I want to zoom in on two philosophers that I absolutely love. We have Albert Camus and we have Nietzsche. Okay, now I'm gonna explain two of their very, very famous, sayings and thought processes, thought provokes. There's a word I'm looking for here. Anyway, some of the ideologies that they explored in their philosophy at their time, and they're quite interlinked, but I'm going to separate them and then I'm going to bring them together for a phenomenal ending. Okay, so we're going to start with Nietzsche, and one of Nietzsche's most famous ideals of saying is this notion of God is dead. Okay, now this is not literal, it's saying that as a modern society, the things in which we extract meaning from, like religion and inherited purpose, is disappearing. Okay, so if you think about it, if you look at like a lot of ancient societies, and there's a really interesting video, and I can't remember. This is the problem, okay, guys. I watch videos on YouTube to help me fall asleep. So sometimes I'll be watching videos and I don't remember that I watched them, but the ideas are embedded in my head. So I can't tell you who did the video, or if I'm dreaming it, like, I don't know. Or I'll wake up in the morning and I have sent my friends videos on like social media and stuff thinking it's interesting, but I don't remember sending it to them. This is something I need to address. I'm also, another thing that's really concerning to me is I had a dream, but my dream felt like TikTok reels. Like, I felt like I was seeing different points of my dream in 30-second sprints. I don't know if that's like a psychological thing of concern, like I need to get off the flipping apps. But that really, like, I woke up and I was like, whoa, like, this is breaking my brain. Anyway, back to this notion of Nietzsche and this notion of God is dead. Okay, if you think about a lot of ancient societies, it's really interesting. If you look at certain studies and papers, I'm going to try and find the video, that you can map the type of religion that the society held based off of the way the society functions, believes, whether they're near water, whether they're on dry land, whether they are a patriot, like different parts of society informs what type of religion and how they inform and decimate purpose. Okay, but for a lot of people, religion and inherited purpose was disappearing. And so the idea that God is dead is basically saying, when you remove this inherited purpose, religion and meaning that ascribes function to people that pre-exist, and functional roles within society, then why and what are we doing? How do we find and attribute meaning? How do we know, again, as humans are meaning-seeking creatures, how do we go about doing any of this? Okay, so when you are young and you're doing well and you are deemed to be special for doing said things, and you've created your whole identity about being this specific thing, okay, being really, really good in academics, being really, really good at piano. Okay, and again, I really just want to keep prefacing, it's not bad to be good at things. Not bad to be good at things. I'm not saying you can't be good at things, but this thing or this notion becomes, and this validation from outside of you becomes an idol. It becomes a god. And when it stops, this structure in which you have defined yourself disappears, and that can lead to a sense of darkness, and it could be the thing propelling young people towards burnout. Those structures put in place that help us define and give us inherited purpose for pretty much all our lives, when we leave the education system, is pulled underneath our feet. It's like Tashi Duncan, when she was playing tennis and she got the career-ending industry, the structure and systems in which she has defined her purpose and her existence, and the thing that kept her going every single day, again, was pulled underneath our feet. And when I think about this, I like to think about the Spider-Man suit video. Okay, so if you watch Spider-Man Homecoming, that came out in 2014, there is a scene where Tom Holland's Spider-Man, he messes up, okay? And Iron Man comes and says, I'm going to take away the suit. Iron Man had built him a special suit to be Spider-Man, and was allowing him to do all of these crazy feats. And Iron Man says to Spider-Man, I'm going to take away the suit. And Tom Holland Spider-Man goes to Peter Parker. I should stop saying Tom Holland Spider-Man. We know it's Tom Holland Spider-Man. So Spider-Man goes, no, you can't take away the suit. I'm sorry, American accent. You can't take away the suit, Mr. Stark. I'm nothing without the suit. And then Tony Stark says, if you are nothing without the suit, then you shouldn't have it at all. Okay, this notion of if Spider-Man's whole reason and identity and ability to be a hero and to be a good Spider-Man is rooted in his attachment to the suit, right? Or if he felt like I'm nothing without this suit, like I can't be Spider-Man without this thing, and him not recognizing that Spider-Man was him as a person, his ideals, his discipline to help other people, his drive to be of value and to continuously seek and help. If he think it's just the tech and gadgets, like he shouldn't have the suit at all. And this is something that Iron Man intrinsically has experienced and he knows because he is the guy in the Iron Man suit. Realistically, he wouldn't be the hero he was without the suit, but he understands my value is not the Iron Man suit. My value is my brain. It's who I am as a person. It's the decisions I've made. I could build that suit from scratch again if I wanted to. I built it in a cave with some little scraps. Like, I am Iron Man. Iron Man is not me. And so in that moment, I think, we can use this and combine it with Nietzsche's ideas that, if we attach our sense of self to this thing, okay, whether it's being good at academics, if it's I graduated from Cambridge, I'm so amazing, blah, 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 you know, there needs to be a sense of detachment. There needs to be this idea of if your whole identity and your world falls apart because I move one thing from it, then you shouldn't have that thing. You should be able to stand within your own 2 feet. You should be able to be Spider-Man without having the suit, because Spider-Man is not a suit. It is a person. It is an ideal. It's an ideology. It's a belief system. It's somebody who saves somebody, your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. If I remove this ability, or if I stop identifying with myself the ability to do really well in exams and I take that part of me away from me, I should not collapse on the floor and start crying. It can be upsetting to fail, and I'm not saying it's not upsetting to fail. It's not upsetting to do badly. It's not upsetting to get a job rejection that you really, really wanted. But if it's creating this complete ego collapse to the point of I don't even want to try anymore, then maybe you need to learn who you are without that thing, okay? You need to learn what your value is, inherently driven by not necessarily the acquiring of things, but your value systems and that sense. I'm trying to phrase carefully. You know what I mean? Okay, now if we shift to Camus, Camus then articulates quite often in his work this notion of the absurd, which is this whole idea of, like I've said many times in this podcast, humans, we have this deep desire for things to be meaningful and to have purpose and to feel like we're meant for something. And there is a conflict because the universe is largely indifferent to this plight and these wants of meaning. Now, if you're particularly religious, you might have a different perspective of this, but I am trying to present to you what Camus was articulating. Right, burnout, particularly that amongst people who are high achievers, when we enter adulthood, can feel like it's absurd. We are told to work hard, to be exceptional, to don't sleep and sacrifice, and life will reward you. Go along this path and do this thing and do this thing, and you will be rewarded because look at all of these things. Look at this high value person. Is that not what you want? Okay, but what many young people at the end of it, like at the end of university, obviously there are so many different societal things in place, like terrible economic factors that we're entering, like the world is a mess on so many levels. So that obviously contributes to it. But many young people are feeling exhaustion and the sense of emptiness when they get to the end of this academic road, and they're just kind of like, well, I did everything that you told me to do, and I don't feel like it's worth it. I don't know. It's like, when somebody hypes up a movie and then you go watch the movie and you're like, this is crap, and then you're questioning the friend's movie and like, what are we doing? Like, why are we here? Or your friend's hyping up their favorite song, they're like, this is the best song ever, and then you listen to it and you're like, oh, I thought this would change my life and it didn't. I think it's that sense of disappointment. And when you get to a disappointment, when you're told all of your life that these things are going to allow you to achieve certain things, then it's like, what am I now? What am I doing now? And this is not to say that telling people to work hard is bad, but I think a lot of people, young people, were taught to work hard to achieve a specific end result and this specific vision of a future that they would be living. And that future, because of societal factors, doesn't exist for a lot of people in this current moment of time. And so now they feel disillusioned because actually I've done all of this hard work, but it doesn't come to anything. Or this notion of, when you study really, really hard for a test and then you still flop the test, and it's like, but I was promised if I worked really hard, then I would get a good grade on this test. I feel ripped off. And it's like, you should teach people to work hard, okay, but you have control of the end results, but the end results aren't 100% in your control. I think it's something that we don't let young people become aware of. And now you're probably like, Jessie, this feels very like complainery, like where is the solution? Well, Nietzsche says, okay, not in response to absurd because they came from two different time periods, but Nietzsche says we shouldn't despair about the fact that, these things disappear. Like we shouldn't, fall into this, oh my God, what's going on? He presents this idea of something called Übersmensch. Übersmensch. I can't do German words. Okay. And it's like if meaning is not given to you, or you aren't prescribed certain meaning because, in his word, God's dead or whatever, then it is up to you to create it. If you are losing your spark and living in reaction to externally validated goals, you can turn around and change where in which you derive your value and self-worth by. The identity in which you carried when you were in school, when you were in uni, or even yesterday, no longer needs to be the identity you hold on tight to now, okay? Like the beauty in the absurdity of the universe being silent to our plights, or the annoyingness of, having to have like a part, this identity shift and this crisis and this burnout is the beauty of you can find and ways to attribute meaning, okay? You can find, and I feel like, when I was looking and considering this terms of continuing this podcast, I think a part of it and the reason why it exasperated me so much is because I was determining the success of the podcast by numerical metrics. And when I first started the podcast, if you've been here since the get-go, it was genuinely just a thing I did because I wanted to be able to feel like I had a funnel for a lot of my more academic leaning ideas. And I had graduated and I was very unhappy when I graduated and I wanted something that just kept me going. And so the validation and the metric of success I had was just releasing the episode. It was less to do, and everything additional, any positive comments, any helpful things I got felt secondary. It was amazing, but it wasn't the reason why I did it. However, as time went on, and obviously people talk to you about podcasts, people like, financial this and this one and numerous, and you start thinking about TikTok clips and trying to get a sense of virality. I think I was losing how I define the metric of success for this podcast, and this is just in one small area of my life. I feel like I've been crashing out for the past year in microdoses, and it just kind of came to a little bit of a head in January. And then I just remember thinking, what was the reason? Like I remember listening to old episodes and hearing like the little flutter of joy and the little like, guys, wait, that didn't make sense, and all of that was on the recording because I really wanted it to feel like the sprawling notebooks, and I did want to have a structure, and I did want it to be clear, and I wanted people to take something away from it, but most importantly I wanted to share the things I was thinking about and questioning, and hoped it would prompt questions in people too. Okay. And I think in many different areas of my life, I had to really look back and sit and think about, okay, like who am I if I'm not like the Cambridge grad and like the high achieving person and blah, blah. Like who am I when I strip all of those things away? And I then began to notice that I just want to be somebody that is driven by curiosity and the desire to make the world a little bit better. And curiosity could mean so many different things for so many different people. But it's like, if it's interesting, why not do it? I remember my sister was like, when you were younger, when you were a teenager, you would do things for the sake of doing it. You'd go and start learning an instrument, not because you want to get grades to be able to get to an amazing uni. Again, nothing wrong with that. But I was very much the type of person of like, why not? I find it fun to not do it. I started learning Korean because I loved watching K-dramas, and I thought it would be cool to watch K-dramas without subtitles sometimes. So I started learning it. Not fluent anymore. But now I feel like everything has to have some external validation point. I'm thinking about the Instagram post. I'm thinking about the LinkedIn thing. I'm thinking about going to my uni reunion in 3 years' time and having something to show for my time that is impressive to those people. I don't care about those people. Why am I doing this to myself? And my entire identity was shifted. I placed my identity in this external entities that I made up in my head's hands. I'm like, bro, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are we doing? So I really trying to find and create a sense of validation for myself that is very intrinsic. And for me, it's just, is this thing interesting? And can you ascribe meaning for it? And if I can do those two things, then why the hell not? Like, why not? And that's not to mean I don't have goals that, are successful. I want to get a good job. I want to do well in my master's degree. Okay. But it's not necessarily because I want to impress other people. And that's not to say there's anything wrong with impress. I'm really contradicting myself. It's okay to like want to impress other people. It's okay for you want other people to see the amazing things that you do. It is just so important to remember that you are more than that. I hope this episode is more of an expansive thing of, oh my God, you know what? Yeah, I do have this very one fixed mindset of what I am and what I value. How do I expand it? You know, think about it. Remember my gamification episode last year, January? That was the first episode of season 2. And I was like, we need to start doing more side quests, and side quests make the game more interesting and make your life more full and rich. That is it. That is literally the purpose of this episode. And that's what I'm going to subscribe for your burnout. Okay, what are things that used to bring you joy that you have removed in the pursuit of an identity that is slowly corrupting you? If you have graduated, if you've left academia, if you're leaving academia and you're starting to feel this sense of existential dread of like, oh my God, what am I doing? Who am I outside of this system that I've lived my whole life in and have validated myself by? These are the things you should be doing. Side quests, following your curiosity, creating meaning, taking down meaning, building those so many blocks of your identity that if one of those blocks gets taken away, and yeah, it can hurt, and yeah, it can be like, oh, that sucked, I really love this block, your whole identity doesn't collapse. You see what I mean? There's always going to be another mountain, and you're always going to want to make it move. And there's always going to be an uphill battle, but sometimes you're going to have to lose. But it is not about how fast you get there. And it's not what's waiting on the other side. It's the what? Everybody sing with me. The climb. Amen. Okay, so that's the end of today's episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you are feeling, you know, either you have things to ponder on, you're feeling inspired, or you absolutely hated this episode. But either way, I hope you enjoyed it, okay? I'll be back. Okay, I'm still on the fence of whether I can keep up weekly uploads, because my life, guys, I am like chock full to the brim with stuff to do. This is a priority, but I work weekend. I'm in uni during the week. I have 2 part-time jobs. I now upload on YouTube semi-regularly, comic book related stuff. But then I also have this podcast, and then I also have to get a job. Like, life is lifing. And then summer's coming, so I'm trying to get the body tea for summer because guys, the summer I'm about to live. If you can't see me on video right now, my tongue is out and like that's how I want my summer to be. Like, how was your summer? Summer of 2026 as a 23-year-old? Anyway, guys, I've spoken for long enough. I'll see you guys next time, probably next week. I'll probably do a footnotes episode. You know what? That will be my promise. A footnotes episode or a main episode every 2 weeks, footnotes episode every other week. So that way you get a little dose of genius in your week. But anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Baby, I'm back. In fact, we're gonna not do the normal outro. We're gonna do me singing, Baby, I'm back. Like I used to be. Baby, I'm back. Bye, guys.
Female genius.